Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we're always talking about the decentralized revolution. We're talking about the way the world is changing. Of course, we're always looking at through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. Technology is always what changes the world. It changes the way that we work, organize, communicate, and so then politics and finance changes around it. Of course, the technology that's changing the world is Bitcoin and this decentralized revolution. That's why we frame that up. And today we have a big show. I want to dig in deep into some changes that are happening as this deglobalization, as this decentralization happens. I've been talking about this for a really long time, and this story is escalating. It really highlights exactly where we're at in this 250-year political revolution, where the world pendulum swings from decentralization, maxes out at centralization, and starts to swing back to decentralization, which is exactly where we're at. So if you want to know what the heck is going on in the world, what this means, and more importantly, where we're going so you can prepare, then this is one that you want to listen to today. Now, a lot of people tell me, Mark, what do you mean that the pendulum's swinging back towards decentralization? Because everything I see is more centralization. Well, you have to understand that the pendulum swing is long. It's a 250-year arc. So over a 50-year period, it's basically sitting up in that centralization period. However, in times like this is when all the change happens. Inside this 250-year cycle, there's 84-year cycles, and it's been popularized by the book Fourth Turning, which is basically in this 80-year cycle, there's 4 20-year cycles. If you're familiar with this, and if you're not, spoiler alert here, but at this last turning, the fourth turning, this fourth 20-year cycle is when all the change happens. That's why you hear the famous quote I've often used of Vladimir Lenin, the infamous quote, I should say, from Vladimir Lenin, is that there's decades where nothing seems to happen, and then there's days where decades seem to happen. And so that's where we're at. We're witnessing literally decades happening seemingly in days. And it seems like the world is just spiraling out of control to those that aren't happy with it. Maybe some people are very happy with the way the world is progressing. But I want to break this down so you can understand this from a play-by-play level, because it's sort of like the proverbial frog in the boiling pot of water, so to speak, right? Where like sometimes if you're just living in it and you're busy focusing on your business, your family, which things that you should be for sure. You shouldn't be absorbing yourself too much in these issues because they don't really mean anything to you daily, but it is important to understand where things are going. And so some of the signposts we see is that as the world is leaving centralization, the central power, so as the federal government of the United States is continuing to get stronger, but not just the United States, the central power of the UN, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Economic Forum, the G7, but as the people are starting to reject their power, each force requires an equal and opposite reaction. They squeeze harder to try to retain power. But the more they squeeze to try to retain power, the more people push back, the more people push back, the more they squeeze to retain power. And so it goes. Now, we can see this in many examples, and I want to dig into one today, one that I'm super passionate about because I'm a content creator. Here I am talking to you and trying to explain this to you. I'm trying to give you perspective on these things. And I guess maybe because I'm a content creator, or maybe because I'm a freedom maximalist, maybe because I'm an American, I believe that freedom above all, and I believe freedom of speech is the most fundamental right. Freedom of speech and freedom to transact. And so I can still remember several years ago, the first time I found myself creating content for my YouTube channel and self-censoring myself. And I remember the feeling specifically of how sad I was to think that here I am, an American inside the United States, and I'm having to self-censor myself. And it's been a while now, and I've had to deal with this, but it's not getting better. At this point, it's only getting worse. However, we're getting lots of tools that are helping us to evade this, so that's the pushing back part, and so then the state has to squeeze down even more. Now, I told my wife, I think it was sometime last year, I said, there's probably a chance in the next 2 years I won't be able to continue doing what I'm doing living inside the United States. Imagine that. Imagine me telling my wife that. Me, growing up in the land of the free, I have the Statue of Liberty and American flag tattooed on my body. I bleed red, white, and blue. My father, my father-in-law both fought in Vietnam. My grandfather in World War II. I bleed for this country. I'm an American patriot. And so for me to have to even tell my wife, hey, just heads up, probably in the next 2 years, we will either have to leave the United States or I'm going to have to find a new job. That's basically what I had to tell her. And while that seemed like hyperbole at the time is pretty much here. So let's break this down. Now, we know, if you're listening to me, you know, not everybody knows this. People in China know this. People in Russia know this. Not everyone in America knows this, that mainstream media, which is no longer mainstream anymore, I'll call it legacy media now. Legacy media is nothing but propaganda. Now, if you listen to me, you already know this, and you can see this everywhere. You know that CNN and CNBC and ABC is all propaganda with an agenda. Now, you could say that the other side, I guess, might be Fox News, probably has an agenda as well. And so everybody's starting to realize this, and so they're not watching anymore. I talked to someone from China a couple years ago, and I remember them specifically saying, why does everybody in America watch the news? And I'm like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't they watch the news? And they said, because in China, we all know that the news is propaganda. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. Old mainstream media, now legacy media, is propaganda, which is why CNN is now on their third president, a CEO president, in 18 months. They are losing viewers. They are hemorrhaging viewers faster than they can. Their top-rated shows in prime time get a few hundred thousand views, My main YouTube channel, Mark Moss, if you're not tuned in, you should go check it out. I get that many views sometimes on my videos. Not consistently, but sometimes I do. I've had over 1 million views on some of my videos. And I'm nothing. You got the Joe Rogans of the world getting 200 million views in a month. Tucker Carlson on Fox News would get more views than all of those other legacy media sources combined. And now that he's gone from Fox and he's on Twitter, he's like 10x that. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but I do know that when Fox hosted the Republican debate, the first one, they had 13 million people tuned in to watch that, while Tucker Carlson, streaming on X, formerly Twitter, had Donald Trump on there and got over 150 million. So 13 million sounds like a lot when CNN's getting a few 100,000. But you have Tucker Carlson getting 150 million views. You have the Joe Rogan says 200 million views. And so the powers that be, the government, they do not like this, which is why, of course, they've been working to collude with these platforms to censor your speech. Now, you might say that people shouldn't be able to say harmful things. But you have to understand that freedom of speech, or I should say censoring of speech, is also censoring your ability to hear. So you might say, hey, they shouldn't be able to say what they say, but that means you don't get to hear what you need to hear. And this is a perfect example that I want to dig into specifically. Let's dig past this big picture stuff and let's get into the weeds. And I want to talk about what the heck is going on in Canada right now. Because if you don't understand what's happening in Canada, you're not going to understand what's happening in the United States and wherever else it's coming to you in the world, specifically Europe. Most of the G7 basically is where it's really happening. So what the heck is going on in Canada? Canada, a country once known as being a beacon of democracy, a beacon of freedom, very similar to the United States, a democratic place, which is now spiraling very quickly into an authoritarian state, a communist state, if you will, using, of course, the tools of censorship. You don't have to censor the truth. The truth will win. The truth wins in open, honest debate. Only when your ideas are horrible and they're lies do you have to censor the truth. Otherwise, if your ideas were good, they would win. Your ideas would win in debate. Only when you have lies do you have to censor. And so I want to talk about what is going on just in Canada. Recently, they've passed 2 bills that have very quickly, like within weeks, reshaped what is going on in Canada. And again, you need to understand this. If you produce content, if you like to consume content, if you'd like to get good information, if you live in Canada, and if you live anywhere in the G7, you need to know what's going on because this is ramping up quick. Now, you probably know that Canada jumped the shark, if you will, when the trucker protest happened, and they quickly went to go seize everybody involved, any of these protesters' bank accounts. They froze the bank accounts. And so, it's important to make sure that not all of your money is in the bank. I like to say, only keep money in the bank that you're willing to lose. So where else do you keep it? Well, part of my money is always kept in gold. I like to keep gold. Gold has been money for 5,000 years, and it still continues to be one of the best places to store your wealth. It's been climbing like crazy since last October. It's up 16%. Silver's been up 30% since last October because people are realizing they need to get into assets that are outside the banking system. And people ask me all the time, where do you get your gold, Mark? And I work with a company called Universal Coin and Bullion. I work with Dr. Mike Fulgens and his company because I can trust them. Dr. Mike Fulgens has written the manuals, he's written the guides on fraud protection, and they have great prices too. And he's got a very special offer for my listeners where you can get a silver coin offer. One of the best, the most popular silver 1 ounce coins is the American Silver Eagle coin. He's selling it with no dealer markup of just $27 each, a limit of 3, and he'll even ship it to you for free with his award-winning gold investment guide. Like I said, this is the most sought after pure silver coin in the world. You can get this very special deal by calling Universal Coin and Bullion to get this $27 offer. Give them a call. That's 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Again, that's 1-800-UCB-GOLD. You got to make sure that you tell them Mark Moss sent you in order to get that deal. Or you can go online to universalcoin.com/Mark Moss. A freedom-loving nation, a democratically run nation that has now quickly transformed itself into one of the most authoritarian states, and it's very, very scary. And as I was saying, in this short time, we've seen just step after step after step, recent developments around Canada that is, like I said, very quickly turning into this authoritarian state. So let's talk about some of this. Now, to kind of frame this up, I want to talk about a tweet from Chamath. Chamath is a famous investor, early investor into Facebook. You know, I think he's a billionaire at this point. And he talked about how he put out a tweet and he said that over the past 2 days, a part of a broader trend that is scary. A Western G8 country, so that's one of the top 8 countries in the world, who is slowly losing its identity, a government without a clear majority. So what kind of a democracy doesn't have a majority? An unskilled but highly ambitious, smooth-talking beneficiary of nepotism as its leader. Well, I think that's Trudeau. We'll break all this down. An establishment that rewards virtue signaling more than value creation. Just a bunch of talk and don't produce anything. All right. Now, he said these are the boundary conditions that slowly veer a country into becoming a judgmental, authoritarian state where some hero, like Trudeau, self-anoints himself on behalf of everyone else to come in and save the day. Now, this is the same hero who calls other Canadians who protest the loss of freedom and civil liberties, he calls them Nazis. Remember the trucker protest? They're Nazis. They want freedom. They must be Nazis. But then he actually brings a real, actual Nazi into Parliament and gives them a standing ovation. And then, when he's called out on it, he says it's Russian misinformation. Now, what's even more scary, because the media called him out over this, then he has to silence the media. Look, there's never been a time anywhere in history that the good guys censored speech. The people censoring speech have never been on the right side. Again, truth wins in open, honest debate. The only reason you have to censor is because people are speaking truth that you don't want others to hear. So when he was called out for calling other people Nazis and then literally bringing an actual Nazi up and the legacy media called him out on it, then he has to figure, well, what I need to do is just censor the media. So they can no longer do that. And so they've passed 2 bills that I want to break down for you. It's important to understand this. And it's basically bringing media and citizen journalists under his thumb to control the information flow. All right, now, if we break this down a little bit, it gets pretty scary. And like I said, it's not just the G7 or the G8. It's coming to a country near you. Now, of course, if you're in China, if you're in North Korea, you're already dealing with this. All right, we can see this happening with Jordan Peterson. If you've been following along with Jordan Peterson, they're trying to censor him. They're trying to control him. But we know that, like I said, this is a rising core issue with Canadians. A recent poll found that 70% of Canadians believe that the Canadian government is becoming too authoritarian. 70%. So in a democracy, mob rule. I'm not a big fan of democracy. If you want to know why, read the book Democracy, the God That Failed to understand this. But it's tyranny of the minority by the majority. Democracy is supposed to be the majority. So if 70% of the people don't like Canadian being too authoritarian, then shouldn't the government listen to that and change? We can see a group of Canadian academics have published an open letter warning the Canadian government that they're undermining the foundations of Canadian democracy. A group of Canadian citizens have launched a lawsuit against the Canadian government, alleging that its recent actions are violating the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, again, in a democracy, it should be the majority, but Justin Trudeau won the 2021 Canadian federal election with only 32% of the popular vote. That's not even a third. So it's certainly no majority. It's certainly not a democracy if that's how it is. But yet we have this minority group running the government. So I don't want to get super deep into the political side and how that happened and what that means. There's a lot to dig into there. But I want to talk specifically about what is going on right now with the laws that are passed. Because as I said, I told my wife, probably within 2 years, I won't be able to do this here in the United States. And here it is over in Canada, and probably coming to a country near you. Now, real quickly, just to sort of understand this, let's just understand who Trudeau is. So Trudeau came to power from his father, who was a very affluent politician as well. But Trudeau had no prior experience in government or business. He was elected prime minister in 2015 at the age of 43 after his father, Pierre Trudeau, served as the prime minister from 68 to 84. In 2007, Trudeau starred in a two-part CBC television miniseries called The Great War, which gave an account of Canada's participation in the First World War. Now, I don't know what it is with these authoritarian leaders being former actors like Zelensky. Maybe it's because they can act very well, like they care about the country. I don't know. But the Trudeau family had a lot of wealth. They had a lot of fortune. But they used businesses. They created value in order to create that fortune. The grandfather had accumulated this fortune by building gas stations around Montreal. He created a loyalty program, sort of like a AAA club over there. And he provided value to people. And he created lots of income and lots of wealth by providing lots of value. But sort of like the fourth turning, this generational theory, by the time it gets down to Justin Trudeau, the grandson, he doesn't do anything. The only thing that he's done is trying to tell other people what to do without ever having done anything himself. And so he's created this establishment of virtue signaling instead of value creation because he's never done that before. So what do we mean? Well, like I said, celebrating an actual Nazi in Parliament. I don't want to get too deep into that again. I want to kind of stay out of the weeds on the political side because I don't believe what's happening right now is a political issue. And what do I mean by that? I don't believe that freedom is right-wing or left-wing. I don't believe it's extremist. It's just freedom. Why is that political? So I don't want to go into left or right or liberal or Democrat. It's just let's look at the factual laws here. Now, as I said, Canada is part of the G7, part of NATO, part of the United Nations, and so it has a big voice on the global stage. And like I said, we've seen this polarization. It's really been growing fast. This divide has been growing fast. We saw what happened with the trucker protest. I covered that extensively. If you don't know what happened, go ahead and do your research. But let's talk about what's going on right now. So in order to stop people saying bad things against the government, in order to continue to control the narrative, in order for them to try to control power, they have to control what people are saying. And so they have now passed 2 bills to control that. Now, they can control what's on TV. They could even squeeze some of the platforms like we saw here in the United States, with the Biden administration squeezing Meta, squeezing Twitter, etc. But what about the smaller broadcasters? What about the independent journalists? Well, they got plans for them too. Now, right off the bat, we can see that they've already passed a couple laws that are already affecting Meta, and it's having a major impact into the news source. The disturbing laws that are going into place into Canada, and it's coming to a country near you. Yes, it's happening in the United States. It's happening in Europe because it's part of the G7. It's part of NATO. It's part of the UN. But let's talk about specifically what's happening in Canada. So let's dive in and see exactly what's inside these laws. So what we can see is that there's a new bill. It's called the country's Online News Act, which basically requires tech companies like Meta and Google to negotiate with and pay publishers for their news content. Now, it's these are walls that start going in that start becoming checkpoints, and then they start becoming choke points. And what happened is now they're creating laws, these regulations, and so the big platforms are now blocking the news. And so now, if you're in Canada, you've probably already seen this, you can't log on to news sources. And so let's say, for example, if a Canadian person is friends with someone who lives in the United States, and the person in the United States shares a link on Facebook to, let's say, an article, well, the person in Canada won't be able to see that article. Now, that sounds like it could be a problem, obviously depending on what news it is. That this is widespread right now, they're just blocking everything. So we can see a couple journalists in Canada have already made some comments. Anne Mary McKenzie says, "It's scary times. I'm no longer able to see the news stories There's Meta and Google have been blocking the process. They're not able to see this. I think Tara Jeffrey says, I think the worst part of receiving this message today was the fact that it came after we posted about a missing woman in Sarnia. It's not just the news orgs that will suffer the fallout of this. It's an entire community. So it's hashtag local journalism matters. And so even stories like, hey, a missing person, can you help us? That's blocked. Now, Meta calls this a business decision, saying it chooses to block news in order to comply with the Online News Act. Now, the company says the Canadian government based its new legislation on the incorrect premise that Meta benefits unfairly from the news content. The Minister of Canadian Heritage says that the country will stand its ground as Meta moves forward with its irresponsible message to Canada and other governments. But this is what happens when you start passing these laws. So now Meta is blocking news sharing from Canadian publishers and Canada as well. We can see that it's had a massive impact on Canadian news media, with some publishers reporting a drop in traffic of up to 70%. News publishers reporting a drop of 70%. Google's planning a similar action for local news, which it will block starting when the law takes effect no later than 180 days after the bill's June 22nd passage. Now, what does this mean for the future of news consumption in Canada? Well, it's all part of the bigger plan. It's part of the EU-UN WEF plan, and of course Trudeau's on board for stricter control over independent news and podcasting. Now, the government regulator, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, CRTC, announced on Friday that it would require registration by independent content producers, including online news companies and individuals that host podcasts on their own websites. So now, remember I said I probably wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing in America? Well, you may not be able to do this in America, you might be able to do it in Canada. So basically, if you create content, a podcast, YouTube, whatever, you now have to go register. Now, if you know your history, you know where that leads. Registration is the first form of control. So now you have to be approved. One of my favorite lines in the book, Atlas Shrugged, which if you haven't read that book, you certainly should, is that when you have to get permission to produce from men who produce nothing. And so here you have people who have never produced anything, but you have to get permission to even produce. And so now, if you want to produce content, a podcast, a YouTube channel, now you have to go register. Well, if you have to register, that means you have to be given permission. So who do they give permission to? We saw you said something mean online before. We don't like your political affiliations or whatever, and so no registration for you, no permission for you. This is the first step. The CRTC says that the law only covers some media companies that are doing more than $10 million a year in revenue, and that the information it's demanding is just minimal. It's not a big deal, right? Right? They say that their goal is to better support Canadian indigenous content and ensure it's available. But, of course, again, as we know, the registration is always just the first part. Now, we can see where this goes, and we can already see how this can be not just applied liberally, but how it can also be abused. And, of course, Trudeau and Canada have a history of abusing this. We can see in 2019, the Liberal Party released a campaign ad that falsely claimed that the Conservative Party was planning to cut health care for seniors. The ad was later removed from YouTube for violating its policies on disinformation. And so they're the ones out there peddling disinformation, which, of course, is why they need to censor the other side. Because, as I said, the truth is always found in open, honest debate. Now, what's going on right now, as I said, there's two bills. They're using two bills and a series of regulations to crack down on this free speech. So there's C-11, which is the Online News Act, and then there's C-18, which is the Online Streaming Act. So there's two different ones, the Online News Act and the Online Streaming Act. The Online News Act receives support from multiple media lobby groups, including the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and things like that. Now, as they're working their way through the legislative process, we can see that the Liberals have repeatedly lied. They've said that they were about targeting big tech and protecting and promoting Canadian culture, but in fact, they are part of a deliberate effort to censor ordinary Canadians. Now, again, if you have to register, if you have to get permission, then they're able to restrict, and it makes it harder to express yourself online. It's not hard to understand that. Now, of course, like I said, they're doing this to protect you. They're doing this to protect you from the spread of disinformation. Of course, they're not saying they're doing it to squash dissent, but they need to protect you from dangerous people using dangerous rhetoric to do things that we don't like the peaceful trucker protest. Of course, like I said, this is always the first step, and we can clearly see where this goes. We can see, back to the democracy, more than 6 in 10 Canadians are concerned about the bill's impact. Canadians are showing that, how concerned they are. They don't think big news organizations need government bailouts, and they believe that the C-18 will harm smaller outlets. And so, again, the majority is saying this. They're not listening to this. Now, it's interesting timing on this. We can see that Trudeau's crackdown comes at a time when the European Union, the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum are all demanding harsh crackdowns on free speech. So is he listening to them? Is he caving to them? Are they working in conjunction with them? Last week, the EU's top censorship officials claimed that X and Twitter was the biggest source of misinformation and demanded, yes, greater censorship. That free speech is misinformation, not us, even though we get caught lying all the time, even though if our information was true, it would win, but we need to censor that free speech because that free speech is misinformation. Well, it's opposite of what we're saying, but it doesn't make it wrong. Ahead of upcoming elections, Google, TikTok, Microsoft, and Meta also have more to do to tackle disinformation. Much of it's coming from Russia, which is using social media to wage a war of ideas against democracy, claimed the European Commissioner Vice President Vera Jourova. It's all Russia, Russia, Russia. They're the ones spreading all the disinformation. They have a massive disinformation campaign, multi-million-dollar euro weapons of mass manipulation, supposedly is what they say. They must protect us from that. The UN next month is co-sponsoring a pro-censorship event with the World Economic Forum, which of course is a private NGO, non-government organization, non-elected, and they're creating a, quote, global coalition for digital safety to demand more censorship. We must stop what you can say, and we must prevent what you can hear in order to protect you. And we must provide censorship in order to keep you safe. The Coalition for Digital Safety. It's always for your safety. The WEF is seeking to regulate big tech companies directly and has captured big tech already. We know this. They got Google, Meta, TikTok, Microsoft all signed up for this. Twitter dropped out, of course, but the censors are relentless. Jourova said last week that Elon Musk is not off the hook, and they're coming strong. Now, when we talk about this type of content, some of the biggest names in the space that are really fighting for free speech, you got Tucker Carlson, you got Buck Sexton, and little guys like me. And we're all going to be speaking at an event in December that my friend, and you hear me talk about on the program quite often, Dutch Mendenhall, is throwing. Now, Dutch Mendenhall is the co-founder and CEO of RAD Diversified. He's also the president of the Alternative Investment Association. And he's bringing his Investment Wealth Summit to Tampa, December 1st through the 3rd. And like I said, Tucker Carlson's going to be there, Buck Sexton's going to be there, I'm going to be there. And if you want to learn how to create financial freedom and security for your future, then you need to be at the Invest Wealth Summit. And you can get your tickets at investwealthsummit.com today. And come join us. If you care about free speech, if you care about your wealth, if you care about your future, come check it out. Come join Dutch. Come join other conservative political commentators, like I said, Tucker Carlson, Buck Sexton, Lisa Booth, Amy Vaughn, and many more. And the tickets are going to sell out. Come to the event. Learn how to diversify your portfolio without relying on Wall Street. Check out the tickets. Go to investwealthsummit.com today. Secure your seat. Tickets are going to sell out. Go to investwealthsummit.com today. Registration means I must get permission. So now I have to get permission to even create content, to speak my voice. So you see how this goes. Now, of course, this is a part of a much bigger picture that the UN, the IMF are all pushing. And yes, it's coming to a country near you. Now, what's next for Canada? Well, in recent times, Canada has shown the world a series of contradictions that threaten to upend the nation's identity as a beacon of liberty and justice. So like I said, you have Justin Trudeau calling out the trucker protests, a peaceful protest, using their constitutional rights, and calling them Nazis. but yet then bringing an actual Nazi soldier up in Parliament and having a standing ovation. If you're listening to me, you probably already get this, but you've probably realized by now that almost everything the authoritarians do is in direct contradiction to what they say. Now, I use the word authoritarians because, again, I don't want to make this a partisan issue. This is not a left or right. This is not a Democrat, Republican. This is not a liberal, conservative. It's not that. It's we the people versus the government. And there's people in the government that, sure, they want to protect our rights and they want to give us more freedom. But unfortunately, there's a massive push inside governments around the world, in the U.S., in Canada, in the EU, in, of course, the WEF, the UN, that are authoritarians. And they want more authority over you. And so if you just listen to their rhetoric, they're saying one thing and doing the other. They're calling one group of peaceful protesters, they're calling them dangerous. They're calling them Nazis and then literally bringing Nazis up. They're saying we must protect you from disinformation, but they're the ones that are spreading the misinformation. And again, not left or right. These are authoritarians, all right? This is Justin Trudeau. I don't know what political party he's in, nor do I care. He's an authoritarian. He's trying to take away your ability to speak and my ability to hear. All right. Now, this is all an illusion, right? We can see over and over and over again how much Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government has completely disregarded any principles of democracy. Again, using disinformation. The government's approach seems to employ the tactic of a guilty until proven innocent. And now, even pre-crime. You might do something bad, so we must prevent you from even getting the chance to maybe potentially do something bad in the future. Now, all of this leads to a massive amount of loss of trust, a huge erosion of trust. And as I've talked about many, many times, and probably really increased this rhetoric, was around the trucker protest. And the thing is with trust is it's very fragile. When trust is broken, it doesn't just come back, which is why we can see, not just in Canada, but in the United States and in almost every developed nation, trust in governments is at almost an all-time low. Now, in some nations, Singapore, some of the Asian nations, trust is still pretty high. It's part of their culture a little bit over there. But here where we sort of have this more free culture and we just have this skeptical viewpoint, but we've seen over and over and over and over again how we're being lied to. And they're the ones lying. They're caught in their lies, and yet they say that we're the ones spreading disinformation. We can see this over and over. We can see how Trudeau has cracked down on this. Now they're passing laws on this. We can see how they've treated their own people. Again, arresting people in the trucker protests. There's still people being held for now more than 2 years in that have been completely denied any due process. There's 4 people in jail that have done 40, 50, 60 days of solitary confinement, 2 years in prison with zero due process of law. That is not a free country. That is not a Democrat country. It's torturous treatment. It's a way that you don't even treat war criminals. Now, they have to continue to hold them because they can't allow them to go to trial because they don't have the evidence, and they'll probably lose, and that's going to look very, very bad on authoritarians. So in dictatorships like you would imagine North Korea to be, or you would imagine, whatever, Russia, as we've been told to be, you would imagine that they would grab their political, opponents and throw them in jail and lock them up and never hear from them again, because they don't want you to hear what they have to say. They have to censor, sort of like what's happening to Donald Trump right now. Right now, he's being run through the court system in New York, and they are putting a gag order. Right? If you notice what's happening with Trump in all these different cases, they're putting gag orders in effect because they can't let you hear what he has to say. I mean, just look at the contradiction here. When Trump was impeached now 2 times, it was 24/7 the news cycle being crammed down your throat nonstop. And now we have Biden going through an impeachment, and all legacy media has completely blacked out. They don't talk about it at all. This is the contradiction that we're talking about, and we can see it. We can see it everywhere. So what do we do about it? Well, for now, we still have a voice. Right? For now, we still have a voice, and we need to continue to speak out on this because the future implications, if unchecked, are bad. Right? These actions can serve as a model for other nations. Like I said, It's happening in Canada. They'll see how it works. They'll continue to turn up the heat here in the United States. It's going to continue to happen in Europe and so forth. The whole world is watching. If the people lay down and allow this to go through, then the rest of the world goes, well, I'm surprised. The people laid down pretty easy. No big deal. We should probably do the same. However, if people stand up, if people put up a fight, if people vote these people out of office, then the rest of the world sees that and goes, well, we don't want to fight. We don't want our people voting us out of office. We probably should think about a different tactic. And so the whole world is watching. Just like the whole world watched the trucker protest, the whole world is watching this as well. If governments can just completely bypass all due process, in the name of whatever, security, keeping you safe, etc., if they can do that and nobody puts up a fight, then the other nations will do the same thing. As I like to say, your compliance makes you complicit. And I know, I'm guilty. I got my family. I got my business. I want to focus on my health. It's a losing proposition. Let me just focus on what I need to do and forget that. But we're never going to win that way. The more quiet we are, the more complicit we are. The more that we comply, the more that we are actually helping push this through. Because all it takes is, the saying, it's not a cliche. The saying is, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. I was listening to an interview with Jordan Peterson talking to his daughter, Michaela Peterson. He was talking about what's happening with him in the college system and how they're trying to take away his license. And she asked him, hey, why are you still there? Why are you still fighting this? Why don't you just move to America like I've done? And he said, look, it's not that far gone. Canada isn't that far gone yet. And take this to the United States or wherever you live. It's not that far gone yet. He said it's one or two crazy people inside the university. One or two people. All we need is one or two people to stand up and counter that. In your local government, it's one or two people that are extremists that are pushing this. And all we need is one or two people to stand up and counter that. In your school board, in your city council, in your county board, local government, local school systems, local governments matter. We've sort of been scammed. We've all been told to look at the president, look at Joe Biden, look at Trump. Let's all get caught up in this presidential thing when that doesn't really matter to our life. But what does matter to your life is your local school board, your county supervisor, your state representatives, and your governor. That's what matters, and you do have a voice. All it takes for evil to prevail is good men to do nothing, and we need one or two people to stand up, sacrifice your time, effort, energy, maybe sacrifice some of your money. Go participate. We can turn the tides. It's not too late yet. Now, if you just tune in, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. Of course, we're talking about the decentralized revolution, how this world is changing as authoritarian rises up and people are pushing back, hopefully motivating you to step up. But that's what we got today. I know it's scary. We will prevail if we do the hard work. But that's what I got for today. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.